have Dr. Kumar now, who will speak to us about awareness as meditative inquiry. Okay, settle down, please.
Thank you, Stephen, for your interesting talk. Actually, what I have been noticing that a lot of focus has been laid on social justice and intellectual pursuits. So your focus on creative expression and aesthetic experience has kind of added a big value to the overall discussion in this seminar. I'm going to be talking about meditative inquiry, which I feel will be an addition to what you have talked, and perhaps will also deepen the idea of what it means to educate and to be educated, and also what it means to live. The idea of awareness, I think, is core of educational discourse world over. If you go and ask any educator that would you consider awareness to be at the center of education, you would find it very difficult that anybody would say no. Although they would agree that awareness is the core of education, the way the idea of awareness is looked at is very different from perspective to perspective. Based on my understanding of the literature of education with which I have engaged over many years, I have found that there are three key perspectives that exist in the field of education that talk about the notion of awareness. And then I'm going to talk about a fourth perspective, which has come out of my research, which is based on studying the works of J. Krishnamurti, whom Stephen has been referring throughout his talk. The first way of looking at the notion of awareness is information transmission. As you must have heard and observed, and I think you all know as an educator, I need not talk a lot about it, that for some reason education world over has become centered on knowledge. And knowledge also not as something that you engage with, that you construct, that you co-construct, but something as passive information transmission, which Paulo Freire aptly calls banking education. So in this model of education, the subjective life of teacher and student is not important. Their consciousness is not important at all. What is significant is the curriculum that they are going to transact. So as long as they transact the curriculum, they are educating the students. So in the information transmission model, education or awareness is reduced to the transmission of information. I think this is pretty clear and I need not go into it any longer. The second way of looking at awareness is the idea of social criticism. I hope all of you are aware of the work of Paulo Freire, or at least most of you must be aware of his work. And he has a central idea in his work which is called conscientization, or critical awareness of consciousness. So Freire and other critical pedagogues and critical theorists question this emphasis on passive information transmission, where there is no subjective, political or critical engagement with the knowledge, with the subject matter. For proponents of social criticism, awareness means the ability to be able to perceive social injustices, discriminations, conflicts. As you must have observed that many of the presentations here in this seminar are focused on social justice. These presentations, these discourses, in one way or the other, derive their ideas from social criticism view of awareness, which in many ways is rooted in Marxist and neo-Marxist views of looking at the field of education. So the people who are interested in social criticism view of awareness thinks that the knowledge that is part of the school, that is happening in the school, and the school itself is embedded in larger political and economic and cultural system. So education and the life of the teacher and the student cannot be understood unless one pays attention to these political, economic and cultural dynamics and historical dynamics. So as you can see that the concept of awareness becomes deeper in the social awareness or social criticism view of awareness. So here awareness becomes the ability to see critically what's going on in the society and what's going on in the name of education, especially with reference to its political, ideological and economic connections. Now, I don't know, I just want to ask, how many of you have heard the name of William Pioneer? See, it's very unfortunate you have. And in what context did you hear of him?
He's a sociologist of curriculum theory.
He wouldn't call himself a sociologist. He was my supervisor. He was my supervisor. He is still a very leading curriculum theorist and educator around the world. And it's unfortunate that in India, very few people know his work and know the work that has come out not only because of him, but the people who have similar thinking like him. So in India, what has become dominant is the critical pedagogy tradition, work of Michael Apple, Henry Giroux, Paulo Freire. But there has been a, you could even call it a paradigm shift, a new addition into the way we look at the phenomena of curriculum, the way we look at the phenomena of education, which is called autobiographical theory or autobiographical studies about curriculum and education. So, and they drive their understanding from phenomenology, existentialism and psychoanalysis. Basically, summarizing it very simply, it is about the inner life of the teacher and the student. So information transmission has no intention of studying what is going on inside teachers and students. What is most significant is the significance, what is of most significance is the knowledge that is being transacted. In the social criticism view, what becomes important is understanding what this knowledge is, what its biases are, what its problems are, what its embedded assumptions are. In autobiographical studies, the idea of education becomes deeper. It becomes subjective. So, awareness in autobiographical studies context take the form of self-reflection. So self-reflection and introspection is given much more emphasis than merely information transmission or just being critical of the society. What it does, many of you have heard, have read Krishnamurti's work and are aware of what its significance is for education. So quite few of you have shown some engagement with Krishnamurti's work. The essence of meditative inquiry is, first of all, what is meditative inquiry? Meditative inquiry means to look into oneself as one is. Now, what is the self? In my understanding, in this particular context, self means whatever is going on inside you. If you take some time, and I'm sure you all must have taken some time, and if you look closely within yourself, you will see a lot of things are going on. You can call them anxieties, pleasures, pains, fears. It's a constant dynamo that is going on inside of us all the time, which Krishnamurti calls consciousness or self. And again, this is not an intellectual or a philosophical construct about self or consciousness. That in my understanding, that's what separates Krishnamurti from most other philosophers, is that his insights and his understanding is existential in nature. So when he talks about consciousness or self, and the way I'm talking about in this particular discussion, it is not a philosophical construct that we have to think about, but it is an existential movement in all of us that goes on all the time. Even when you are asleep, dreams are simply the movement of this consciousness in unconscious state. But the movement is going on. So the focus of meditative inquiry is to understand what this movement is, what goes on inside of us all the time. Now one may ask a question, why is it significant? What is the significance of understanding what goes on inside of you? Now earlier Sakshi, I think, asked a question, why is it happening that all over the world education seems to be taking the similar form? Schools are acting like prisons and all the things. I don't want to repeat what Stephen has said in his talk. Why is it happening all over the world? And in the beginning when Stephen asked a question, then sir, you said that the conflicts and the wars and the bloodshed. So if you see what is going on outside, in the outside world, it wouldn't be very difficult to see that there is a tremendous crisis going on in human life at all levels, whether you see in the field of education, whether you see in the field of politics, whether you see in the field of culture. Tremendous crisis is going on, which is characterized by contradictions, strifes, conflicts and wars. And I have observed and I have seen that most of us tends to believe that that crisis is somehow disconnected to what is happening inside of us, as if the wars have no connection to who we are as human beings. In other words, as if all these economic, political, social problems are disconnected and independent of who we are as human beings. Not only they are disconnected and independent outwardly and need to be taken care of independently and in a disconnected fashion outwardly, but also that they do not have any connection with ourselves. So the crisis of humanity has no relationship to the crisis that each one of us go through in our lives as human beings. I just want to ask, am I exaggerating that all of us are going through crisis, that all of us has inside of us an inbuilt crisis that is ever present? We might not face it, we may escape it, we may never look at it, we may never talk about it, but there is a tremendous sense of conflict and crisis in each of us. Is this an exaggeration or this is the fact of our lives? Because if it is an exaggeration, then there is no point discussing any further. But I have seen through my own meditation, through my own understanding, through my own inquiry, that all of us are somehow caught up in this tremendous crisis that goes on inside of us. And somehow we believe...
It's not independent, it is connected with the outside world.
Definitely.
And every world is connected with the outside world.
Sorry, can you...
Something we don't connect it.
Let me... I made it dialogical and I want to have a dialogue. Thank you. It is connected, but the way we look at it, it seems that we want to look at the problems independently. For example, we want to look at the problem of war through peace treaties. But we don't ask a question, why do human beings fight at all? And if we ask this question, we give economic explanation, if we give political explanation, we give historical explanation, but we never ask why human beings fight in the first place. Not only in the battlefield, but in relationships. Why is there a conflict in relationships and why is there a conflict inside of us? Is that a question? And the reason why I'm asking is because we tend to think that the problems of the education are somehow disconnected to who we are as human beings. If education is in such a pathetic state, it has to have some connection with who we are as human beings. Barring some exceptions like Krishnamurti and Rabindranath Tagore, why is the field of and you can take any field, you can take legal field, you can take economic field, you can take educational field, why is there such a tremendous crisis in all these spheres in humanity? Is it somehow disconnected to who we are as human beings? My thesis is, my understanding is that the crisis is deeply, intricately and very profoundly connected to who we are as human beings. And it is because we have not paid any attention or very little attention to what goes on inside of us as human beings that all these problems exist. Now, many people, especially Marxists, will say that's completely idiotic. The crisis is external because of the economic disparities, and what you have to do is just fix the system outside, make better laws and policies and regulations, and then human beings will be in order. I tend to think that's a very dangerous assumption. I have sympathy with Marxist thinking to some extent, but this is a very dangerous assumption that by changing the external world, human beings are going to change. Because it means that it is not the human beings who have created the world through their interaction and through their engagement, but it is the world that has created human beings. I'm not denying the dialectical relationship between inner and the outer, but inner life of human beings, I believe, is much more powerful and has brought about the crisis that we see in the world. So the crisis of education is a human crisis, and it is very deeply connected to who we are as human beings. Now, Krishnamurti has suggested, and I am not repeating Krishnamurti and quoting Krishnamurti because Krishnamurti, as I said, is somebody who talks about existential experimentation. So you cannot understand Krishnamurti by reading him. You can only understand Krishnamurti when you experiment with him. It is through experimentation that you discover your own truth, rather than quoting or borrowing from Krishnamurti. So even though I have great respect for him, because he has opened my eyes in many areas, I am not quoting him or repeating him. Whatever I am saying is my own understanding. So Krishnamurti says that whatever goes on inside of you has to be looked at, understood, and gone very deeply into. Now, how can you go deeper into yourself? Even forget about going deeper. How can you look at yourself? In what way can we look at ourselves? What goes on inside of us? Take, for example, an anxiety or a fear that is going on inside of me. How am I going to look at it? Generally, how much time do I have?
You have about 7-10 minutes.
For my presentation, but an additional 20 minutes. I want to make a dialogue, right? So I don't want
You
to.
can take 12 minutes. That's it.
No, what I'm saying is I want to make a dialogue right from here.
Oh, so you just segue into that.
Yes.
Okay.
So we all have seen fears in our lives, right? It is not again a philosophical construct or a theory that I'm trying to persuade you to believe. We all have fears and anxieties in our lives. What is our usual approach when we have fear or anxiety in us? How do we respond to it?
We avoid it.
Sorry?
We avoid it or remove the stressor that is causing it.
We want to avoid it.
We run away,
Remove the thing that
Cause.
is causing it.
or we run away from the object of our fear.
And yeah, please.
Ignoring it, hoping it will go
I know,
away,
sometimes we
doing
fight
something different.
Sometimes we fight with it.
Either react or respond to it.
Sorry?
You can either react to it or respond to it.
What does it mean? What do you do? How do you differentiate between the two, reaction and response?
Reaction is more sort of immediate. Spontaneous, you probably think about it and see how you can solve it or deal it.
Yes, sir.
Responsibility.
Sorry?
We give the responsibility to the cause.
It is because of something or somebody that I am in fear or in anxiety. Yes, sir.
So I always think that fear is something different from me. I never realized that I myself am fear many times. So I have to realize that I have become fear when actually of that.
You have gone a little further. Just a minute. Anybody else? So, okay, let me ask. Do we ever come in contact with the fear? When I avoid it, or when I fight with it, or when I run away from it, do I ever come in contact with it? Which means that there is no division between fear and myself. That I have gathered my energy to look at it completely. So there is a contact between me and the fear, and I am not moving away from fear at all. Have we experimented with that ever? Not moving away from fear at all. So escaping, suppressing, running away, all those things are kind of our effort to suppress or go against fear, to somehow tuck it down so that we don't see it, so that it doesn't affect us. But the I'm sorry for using the word, but the beauty is it never goes away, because you can, through your conscious mind, from your conscious mind, you can force it down, but it is going to come up again. And if you are so strong that you have really suppressed it in the daytime, it is going to come up in the night time when you are asleep. So it's never going to leave you alone. So can we come in contact with our fears or whatever is going on inside of us, whether it is pleasure or it is pain or it is anxiety? Can we come in contact with that? And let me ask one more question. Have we tried to come in contact with it? Not fighting with it, not struggling with it. Yes?
I don't know whether it is related to your query, but the fear of getting bad marks or failing, not doing work in time, that fear I think everyone has or might had or probably. So I had this fear since my childhood. So it was from bad marks, failing, then now it has with assignments and all. So I think that I have passed that stage. I don't feel fear now. I'm like, even if I'm not submitting my assignments on time, probably not submitting at all, so I don't fear of failure. I have no fear of failure. I don't know why. I don't know the reason. But I don't feel that fear. So, you have any comment?
Just two brief comments. One, resolve the feeling of insecurity or instability that goes on inside of us. It may not be connected to one particular thing, but the feeling of insecurity, of feeling volatile, of not knowing what's happening in life, where I am going, what's happening to me, whether I will get what I want to get or not. This constant feeling of instability doesn't go away. So, can we come, two questions, can we come in contact with what is going on inside of us? And what is its significance in education? These are the two questions I have. First, let's explore the first one. Yes, please.
I have a different question. Can I ask you that first? Actually, you've been talking about human traits. If we talk about human traits and more as you read Kumar and different train of thought, is that there are human traits. When we talk about meaning making, we're talking about meaning making situated within so my fears, my biases, or even my deep inner thought of myself is either constrained or is because of the culture and my linguistic, my social, everything, the culture I am living in. And that's how I make meaning of the world and meaning making. So when you abstract it out as this, is this decontextualized human trait, I have a problem with it. Mm-hmm. Because I feel all our meaning making, our deeper thoughts, everything is, we're not this human being in air. We're situated somewhere, we're talking a language, we're within people. And that's my fundamental problem with Krishnamurti, actually, because I feel there is no human trait as such.
Actually, what you're saying is significant, that we are influenced by our context. We are made by our context, right? That is our conditioning. But you see, the human brain has a tendency to be conditioned.
It's not about conditioning, it's how we think, how we make meaning. It's not only a constraint. When we say conditioning, immediately we're giving it a negative connotation. It's not about conditioning or restricting us to something. It's how we are. We say some things because of where we are, the languages we speak, the people we live with, that all the culture that goes with it, right? Conditioning is a very negative thing. It's like you're being influenced by it. Even your deeper thought. I cannot have the self which is not around my surroundings, and there's no human trait, according to me. It's you make meaning with the surroundings you live in, and I would seriously like you to think about that. And
I want to engage with it right away. Yes.
So you have been asking, who am I? So I have a question, like when you asked who am I, or you get disconnected from the society, is it that you want to say that like our Christianity or like our Brahma Kumaris, that I am connected to Brahma or God and go ultimately there? Because I want to go away from that. I don't want to be connected to that. So is that your Christianity, that you try to connect here and you see that you're part of that?
Well, I think few things have to be understood. Inner and outer are not two different things. Self and society are not two different things. Individual and society are not two different things. It is all a movement of consciousness, whether it is taking place externally or whether it is taking place internally. In fact, what you see in society as systems or structures, in my understanding, they are crystallized forms of human thinking, of human consciousness. Now to your question, see, I am not homogenizing, right? I am not homogenizing that everybody is the same, that people are not dissimilar. But if you see certain things, we are extremely similar to each other. Like if you see fear, I have been teaching in Canada, I have been in Canada for the past 7.5 years. I don't see that Indians and Canadians are completely drastically different. We all are human beings. And fear, for example, is our existential reality. The crisis that we go through, I'm not creating traits out of it, that we have this, and we check mark it, and that's how it limits us. I think there are people who have broken through this crisis of consciousness, those who have gone a little deeper. But we don't have to depend on what others have said, but we have to go into ourselves and ask this question, whether this is a human trait or not. Does what goes on inside of me disturb me? That's the most significant question. Is there a disturbance inside of me?
Fear is an abstract concept. Now, fear by itself does not make sense unless it's
not at all.
Unless it's defined as what entails fear, and what entails fear is very different in different cultures. It might now, we're talking about it's such a porous culture now. Everyone knows everyone else in this communication era. But if you are talking in say, just imagine two completely silo cultures who never meet. Fear might be an emotion that they have. It's an abstract concept that linguistically or culturally you have developed and called it fear. And you define it, right?
Just one thing.
I was thinking, if you're, an Inuit, coming face to face with a polar bear, okay, somebody in the Sundarbans coming face to face with a tiger, is that not the same emotion we are talking about? Is there something fundamentally different?
How do we say that? We've given the term fear.
No, leave aside the word fear. I'm saying the existentially what is going on inside of you. Leave aside the word fear, even emotion.
I'm saying existentially also that it is constituted by a culture. So I'll leave it at that.
But might there not be intercultural parallels? And with all due respect to what you said, I agree with you that that we do create meaning. I agree with you and Brunner and Wittgenstein and so many others, that we are really content. We can't operate or even speak independently of linguistic and social context. But might there not be parallels? Might there not be intercultural parallels? And as you yourself pointed out, given globalization, all these cultures are becoming very porous, very permeable, to where you can't really talk in any monadic, culturally segregationist sense at all. So the idea of some kind of pure culture that's out there somewhere that anthropologists haven't discovered and that's net inaccessible, it doesn't make any sense. And also, when it comes to emotions like fear, we're talking about a primal biology that transcends culture, because we're looking at a fight or flight response, which could be mediated, I agree with you. So the way in which the Inuit responds to the bears might be different than the way the Sundarban villager responds to the Bengal tiger. But there is a similarity in that it's part of the hardwiring of the brain that goes back to the reptilian and the limbic and the more primitive sides of the brain, pre-neocortex and prefrontal.
Let me ask it
So if it's
much
part
more
of
simply.
physiology, may not the mediations be more similar in that sense? The symptoms of fear, the palpitations, the anxiety, the
How much
sweat,
time do I have?
the smell of
5
fear
minutes.
might-
Sir,
Okay.
can I say, because I have less time and I can talk to all of you outside of this room, I just want to say a few things. Can I say a few things? No, not at all. See, the one thing that you are... I personally think that human beings are not deep down different from each other. We may have cultural diversities, different ways of looking at things, but deep down human beings are not different from each other. And deep down we all are going through a crisis inside of us. It is not a philosophical concept, and if it is a philosophical concept, put it in the garbage before you leave. So look at inside of you and not believe me or anybody, and see if there is a disturbance that is going on inside of you. And if there is, I, based on my own personal understanding, feel that we must pay attention to what is going on inside of us, because it is the unconscious and the mechanical living that has brought about such a mess in the outward world. And unless there is a deeper comprehension and even transformation of what is going on inside of us, not a single external problem can be addressed. And because of this extraordinary significance of looking at oneself, which in essentiality is meditation or awareness, not based on any system or tradition, but directly coming in contact with who you are. Unless that happens, education, not only education, but the whole of human living will remain superficial and conflict-ridden. Thank you. Please.
But how this can be done in the children, in the school?
Actually, I mean, at one level I completely agree with you, but at another level I'm forced to differ. Where I agree with you, yes, of course, we have to understand who we are. But one way of understanding who I am is, of course, I mean, well, inner reflection, looking inward, but there can be an educated looking inward. For example, I mean, in one way, Buddhism helps you doing that. Call it educated or trained. How do I see myself inside? Another is, for example, coming from evolutionary psychology. Now, evolutionary psychology will tell me that my brain evolved 10,000 years back or 20,000 years back, where I had to survive against fear of my environment, against dangers in my environment. So I had to protect myself, and therefore the fear of the unknown, therefore the fear of the sound behind me, and therefore the fear of a predator or something attacking me, and also the fear of, for example, status. Status is a need because we were a tribal social system living together. So I have a fear of how I project myself. Am I sounding stupid right now raising this question? This fear. So this is inherently related to my evolutionary instincts given to me to make sense of what others say around me and how I relate to them and so on. So this is kind of an educated understanding of myself, how my mind functions in such a manner so that what you are saying is there's a constant turmoil, and then there's a modular description of the brain that we have these modules which constantly almost vie for attention. So there's a module of friendliness, there's a module of status, there's a module of needs, sexual needs or physical needs or whatever. I mean, there are so many things actually conflicting. Yes, we are in conflict, but first, why are we in conflict? It's important to understand, but more important, where I'm very interested in listening to, what can I do about it? So, and of course, one would like to look at Buddhism or Krishnamurti or whoever has an answer to that. It's the deepest, most troublesome question troubling human beings.
I don't think Krishnamurti or Buddha, anybody has an answer to it. They can only point you to it, but they don't have an answer for it. And I think your questions are valid, that evolution, from the perspective of evolution, all those things are somehow inbuilt in us, right? Fear. But the significant thing is they all are mechanical. They are mechanical response. You hear a sound, you react in a particular way. Can this mechanicalness be broken? When an incident happen which arises fear in you, you can engage with that fear mechanically, run with it, suppress it, or do all the kinds of things. But can you gather your energy to look at it? Because this gathering of energy and looking at it is not mechanical. And that breaks down the pattern of mechanicalness. So is it possible to be existentially free of the mechanicalness? Or human beings are only machines responding to biological and cultural impulses? Or is there a possibility for some existential freedom? Or are we slaves?
There should be. I mean, at least one hope there is.
One must go.
Thoughtlessness, what is that? Nothinglessness.
Sorry?
Thoughtlessness. Krishnamurti's thoughtlessness is the answer?
That's what I'm saying.
Sorry, ma'am, there's just time for one more question.
Don't accept anybody's answers, whether
Yes,
Krishnamurti's or Buddha's.
Avinash,
Ashwani.
sorry, Ashwani, the way you have defined the self, please correct me if I am wrong, I forget the exact words. So the way you have defined this, it invites automatically some questions. For example, you have defined self as a flowing phenomena. So I believe that, what do you think about, because self is something that if it is not being some approximation, crystallized, condensed at some point, so I don't think logically that it is becoming or evolving as a self. So one question is this, so what do you think about this?
Can you explain a little bit more? You are saying that I am saying self is a movement, is a flow, but you think it is a crystallized, condensed entity?
Yeah, I believe so.
Look at it. Don't believe me or
please,
yourself.
please,
look at it.
Let me finish.
So I wasn't being mean or anything. I'm just saying look at it.
Let me finish first of
Sure.
all my questions. My second question is this, that maybe the fear is a very inner specific and inner dependent entity, but I believe that crisis is something which is dependent on ethical or value system which is evolved from the cultural evolution outside of us. So how do you look at it? And third question was, why do you call it meditative? Why don't you call it as reflective or reflection?
I want to respond to the third question because I think I can respond to that more fully. In what is happening in reflection or introspection is, there is an assumption that there is a free I or independent entity who can look at fear, who can look at jealousy, who can look at anxiety and independently analyze it, synthesize it, do something with it. that is happening in reflection and introspection. What is happening in meditative inquiry is, you know that the person, you understand through observation that the person who is trying to deal with the fear is essentially not different from fear. So self has no compartments. One is an independent entity which is looking at fear. But if one observes, one sees that one is not different from the fear. Fear is just a movement of oneself. So in meditative inquiry, the division is dropped. Judgment is dropped. So she was right by calling it fear. It's in a way, it's or conditioning, we are giving it a negative connotation. But if you want to really observe what is going on inside of you, you have to put aside the judgment. You have to put aside the comparison. You have to put aside any activity that you want to do with it. Only then it is going to reveal itself. Because the moment you do anything with it, you are distorting it. You are not letting it, as Krishnamurti says, flower. You are not letting it show its full colors. Whether it is fear, or it's jealousy, or it's guilt, or it's sex, anything. You are not letting it show its full colors. So meditative inquiry is observing oneself without control, without judgment. And one can only understand it through experimentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen and Ashwini. We are done with this session, I guess. We have one little